The call came in at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, which was the kind of detail that shouldn't matter but somehow always does. A school shooting at Hargrove Preparatory Academy, active situation still developing, 4 units en route, 2 victims already down in the parking lot, 1 gunman, possibly 2 unconfirmed, and somewhere in that building, 231 students, who had gone to school that morning, thinking about midterms and lunch, and whether the person they liked had noticed them yet. Sergeant First Class Milo Tran had been with the Ashford County Sheriff's Department for 11 years. He had worked active shooters before. Not many, but enough to know that the first 60 seconds of a response tell you more about how it will end than anything that comes after. He pulled into the Hargrove parking lot at 11:52, and what he saw in those first 60 seconds was controlled disorder. Units fanning out, perimeter being established, a cluster of students who had escaped through a side exit being herded behind cruisers by 2 deputies, and then at the far edge of the main entrance, a woman kneeling over a body on the pavement. She was not police. She was not in uniform of any kind. She was wearing dark jeans and a gray zip-up jacket, and she was working on the person beneath her with the kind of focus that the rest of the scene go quiet around her. Not metaphorically, Tran noticed it literally. The 2 deputies nearest to her had gone still, watching even though they should have been moving. He crossed the lot toward her. The victim on the ground was male, late 30s, a teacher by the look of the lanyard still around his neck. He had been hit in the upper left chest and possibly the shoulder. He was conscious but fading. The particular kind of fading that Tran had learned to recognize as the body beginning to make a decision it hadn't announced yet. The woman had already cut the man's jacket open along the left seam. One motion with a tool Tran hadn't seen her produce. She had 2 fingers pressed into the wound at an angle that made no sense to him at first, and then made complete sense when the man's breathing, which had been shallow and wet, suddenly opened up. Not fully, but enough. Like a door that had been stuck being persuaded back on its track. "He's got a sucking chest wound," she said. Not to Tran specifically. Just to the air, the way someone narrates when they're processing faster than they can communicate. "Lung is partially collapsed. He needs a chest tube in the next 20 minutes, or we're having a different conversation." She looked up then briefly, and her eyes moved past Tran to the ambulance just pulling through the gate. "Tell them," pneumothorax left side, "and tell them she's already sealed." She had used 2 pieces of packaging material from something in her jacket pocket to create an improvised flutter seal over the wound. It was not pretty, it was not textbook, it was exactly right. Tran relayed the information to the paramedics as they ran up. He watched the woman step back, strip 1 glove off, and move 2 steps to the right where she stood, scanning the entrance of the building, with an expression that had nothing in it. Not relief, not adrenaline, not the particular performative calm that people put on when they want to look calm. Just assessment. She was already somewhere else in her head. He would find out later that her name was Brooke Weller. She had been at Hargrove that night for a parent-teacher conference that ran late. She drove a 2019 Honda Civic with 94,000 miles on it, and a parking permit from Mercy Falls Regional Medical Center hanging from the rearview mirror. She worked nights, mostly. She had worked nights for 3 years. What Tran would not find out that night, or the next morning, or for several weeks afterward, was what Brooke Weller had done before. She became a night shift nurse at Mercy Falls Regional. What she had been, in the years that didn't appear in any employment file, he could access through standard channels. What the small mark on the inside of her right forearm actually meant visible for just a moment when her jacket sleeve rode up, as she stepped back from the man she had kept alive on a parking lot in the dark. He filed it away the way he filed everything. And then he went back to work. The building was cleared by 1:15 a.m. One gunman, 17 years old, who had barricaded himself in the second-floor science wing, and ultimately surrendered without additional shots fired after a 40-minute standoff. 3 victims total, the teacher in the parking lot, a security guard, who had taken a round in the thigh, and would recover, and a sophomore girl who had been grazed along the left temple, and was already talking to paramedics by the time SWAT reached her. It was, by the terrible arithmetic of these events, a better outcome than it could have been. Tran spent the rest of the night doing what he always did after something like this. Writing reports, fielding calls, making sure his deputies had what they needed, answering questions from people higher up the chain, who wanted to understand how the situation had developed and whether the response timeline could have been shorter. He said the things that needed to be said. He was thorough and he was honest, and he went home at 6 a.m. and sat in his driveway for 7 minutes before going inside. He thought about the woman in the parking lot. He thought about the way she had moved. Not fast in the way that people move when they're scared and running on adrenaline. Fast in the way that people move when fast is simply the setting they operate at. The default mode, the thing that has been trained into them, until it is no longer a choice but a condition. He had seen that quality in exactly two kinds of people in his career: elite athletes and operators. She was not an athlete. He thought about the flutter seal. A proper improvised flutter seal, applied in under 90 seconds in the dark on pavement, without a kit. There was a protocol for it. He knew because he had taken an advanced trauma care course the previous year, and the instructor, a former special operations medic, had walked them through it. Twice. Both times he had struggled to get it right in a simulated environment with full lighting and no stress. She had done it by instinct. He thought about her eyes, the way they had moved past him to the ambulance, not with urgency, with calculation. Like someone who had already run the scenario, and was simply executing the plan that the scenario required. He went inside. He made coffee. He did not sleep. Brooke Weller had grown up in Terre Haute, Indiana, the second of 4 children. The only one who had been described by teachers as quietly intense rather than difficult, which is what quietly intense looks like to people who don't know what to do with it. She had been good at everything she tried, and passionate about almost nothing, which was a particular kind of loneliness that doesn't have a name, but is common enough to be its own category of human experience. She had joined the army at 19, not out of patriotism exactly, and not out of desperation, and not because anyone had pushed her. She had joined because someone had told her it was the hardest thing a person could do, and she had wanted to know if that was true, and because at 19, she was already aware that she needed something that most of what was available to her could not provide. It turned out she was correct. She had spent 2 years in standard service before someone noticed what Tran would notice years later: the particular quality of her focus, the way she processed complex situations, the absence in her of the hesitation that most people carry. She was flagged. She was evaluated. She was offered something that did not have a formal name in any conversation she was allowed to have with anyone outside the room where she accepted it. She accepted it. She would not talk about the years that followed. Not to anyone who had not been in those rooms. Because she had agreed not to, and because she had meant it when she agreed. And because the thing about the kind of work she had done was that talking about it did not relieve it. It just redistributed it. Better to keep it contained where it was, and let the civilian life she had built sit on top of it like a house that didn't know what was underneath. She had become a nurse because it was the closest thing she could find to the part of the work that had mattered most to her. Not the other parts, not the parts that had asked things of her, she had given and never gotten back, but the part that was simply this: keeping a person alive when everything around them was trying to make them stop. She was good at it. She was good at it the way she was good at everything, which meant she was excellent, which meant she was unsettling to people who could not identify the source of the unsettling feeling, which meant she worked nights and kept mostly to herself, and the younger nurses thought she was cold, and the attending physicians respected her efficiency, and nobody asked too many questions. That was fine. She preferred it that way. Tran did not do anything with the thought for 3 days. This was not unusual for him. He was a patient man by nature and a thorough one by training, and he had learned over 11 years that the instinct to act immediately on an incomplete picture was how people made mistakes they spent of their careers qualifying. He let it sit. He worked. He reviewed the incident report from the Hargrove response, and noticed in the paramedic documentation a single line: patient stabilized prior to EMS arrival via improvised occlusive dressing applied by bystander. Technique consistent with advanced trauma training. Consistent with advanced trauma training. He read that line 4 times. On the 4th day, he called his contact at the Regional Fusion Center, a man named Corbin Adler, who had spent 12 years in federal counterterrorism before a knee injury and a cleaner life had redirected him into intelligence coordination. Tran and Adler had worked together on 3 cases. They trusted each other the way people trust each other when they have been in the same difficult room and come out the same side. He described what he had seen. He described it carefully, the way he described everything. No editorializing. No conclusions offered before they were earned. He described the movement, the technique, the eyes. He mentioned the mark on her forearm, the glimpse he'd caught, and said only that it was geometric and dark and did not look decorative. Adler was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What's the name?" "Brooke Weller. Night shift on, Mercy Falls Regionals." Another pause, longer this time. "How old is she?" 34. The pause after that was the longest. And when Adler spoke again, what he said was not what Tran expected. Though later he would not be able to say precisely what he had expected. "I'm going to need you to not ask me anything else about this," Tran said. "All right. And I need you to understand something." Adler's voice was not different exactly, but it had shifted. The way a room shifts when someone changes the light. Whatever you're thinking about why she moves the way she moves. Whatever you're thinking about how a night shift nurse in Ashford County knows how to seal a chest wound in the dark on a parking lot. You're probably not wrong. And that should tell you everything you need to know about how you proceed from here. "How do I proceed from here?" Tran asked. Adler said, "You go back to work, and the next time you're in a situation where someone's going to die, and the outcome depends on who's in the room, you hope she's there." He hung up. Tran sat with the phone in his hand for a while. He thought about 11 seconds, and a parking lot, and a man whose lung had been persuaded back to work in the dark. He thought about the word consistent. He thought about what it meant for a skill to be consistent with advanced training. And what came after that, and whether there was a word for what came after advanced. He did not think there was. Not in any manual he had ever read. Mercy Falls Regional Medical Center ran 3 shifts. The overnight crew came in at 11 and left at 7. And in those 8 hours they saw what the day shift rarely saw. The city reduced to its most honest version. Stripped of the performance that daylight required of people, the drunks and the desperate, and the ones whose bodies had quietly been failing them all day, and could no longer pretend otherwise. The accidents, the ones who fell, the ones who were pushed. Brooke had worked overnight for 3 years. She had learned the names of the security guards, and the names of the parking lot attendants, and the name of the woman who stocked the vending machines at 3 a.m. A detail that most people on her floor could not have supplied. She had learned these names because she paid attention to the edges of things. That was not a choice. It was also not something she had ever managed to turn off. She had heard about Hargrove on the radio during her drive home that night. While she was still 2 miles from the school, she had not planned to stop. She had learned a long time ago that planning to stop, and then not being needed, was worse than not stopping at all. A particular kind of helplessness she did not enjoy. But she had been 2 miles from the school, and the radio had said victims down in the parking lot, and she had turned without deciding to turn. She did not think about it in terms of heroism. She did not think about it in terms of anything really. A man was dying on a parking lot, and she was 2 miles away, and she knew what to do. The math was not complicated. What she thought about on the drive home afterward was the sergeant, the one who had come across the lot toward her. She had clocked him at about 30 meters, his gait, his eyes, the way he moved through a chaotic scene without letting the chaos touch him. Not a man who was pretending to be composed. A man for whom composition was structural, not cosmetic. She had seen him file. The moment she stepped back from the patient, she had seen him notice the motion of her hands, and the specificity of the technique, and the absence in her of the thing most people have in a crisis. Not adrenaline, exactly, but the noise that adrenaline makes, the internal static that bleeds into movement and decision. She had seen him begin to ask himself a question he did not yet have words for. She had put it in a category she kept for things she could not resolve immediately and drove home. 2 weeks later, she was charting notes on a quiet Thursday night, when the charge nurse, a compact, efficient woman named Mrs. Dunbar, who had worked the floor for 18 years and treated it like her personal property, came to the station and said there was a man asking for her in the lobby. "What kind of man?" Brooke said without looking up. "Sheriff's Department," Mrs. Dunbar said. "He says it's not official. Says he just wants to talk." Brooke capped her pen. She thought about that for approximately 3 seconds. Then she said, "Tell him I'll be down in 10 minutes. She finished the chart first. She was precise about this. He was standing near the windows when she came out. looking at the parking lot with his hands in his jacket pockets. He had the specific posture of someone who is used to waiting without it, looking like waiting. She noticed as she approached that he had positioned himself with his back to a wall and a sightline to both entrances. He did not do this consciously. She recognized the unconscious version from the inside. Sergeant Tran, she said. He turned. The fact that she knew his name did not surprise him, which told her something about him. Weller, he said. I appreciate you coming down. I'm on in 40 minutes, she said. So? He nodded. He did not apologize for the imposition, which she also noted. He said, I wanted to thank you in person for what you did at Hargrove. Mr. Callahan, the teacher, he's going to make a full recovery. The surgical team said whoever stabilized him made the difference. She said, he did most of the work himself. Bodies want to survive. You give them the right conditions, they'll do it. Tran looked at her for a moment. Not the way people look at someone they find strange. The way people look at something they are trying to understand correctly. He said, I've been doing this job for 11 years. I've seen a lot of people respond to emergencies. Some of them trained, some of them not. And there's a quality that some people have. He paused, finding the words. The ones who've done this in conditions that weren't controlled. In environments where the absence of the right equipment or the right lighting or the right personnel was not a problem to be solved but a constant to be worked around. He paused again. You have that quality. Brooke was quiet. I'm not asking you to tell me anything, he said. I want to be clear about that. I made a call to someone I trust. I described what I saw. And what I was told, in summary, was to stop asking and to be grateful. She looked at him for a moment. He was not performing this. He was not constructing it to get a reaction from her. He was telling her the truth because that was apparently what he did. She said, And are you grateful? Yes, he said simply. The word landed between them and sat there. She looked at the parking lot through the window. The same kind of parking lot, same kind of sodium lights, making the asphalt look yellow and cold. She thought about Hargrove. And she thought about other parking lots. In places that were not on maps. That anyone she knew would have access to. And she thought about the particular texture of the air at 2 a.m. in difficult places, and she thought about the fact that she was standing in a hospital lobby in Ashford County, Indiana. And that the man across from her had driven here, not in an official capacity, but because he felt that something true deserved to be said out loud. She said, There are people who do things that nobody will ever be able to acknowledge they did. Not because the things weren't real. Because acknowledging them would require explaining the context. And the context isn't available to explain. She said it carefully. Not the way someone delivers a speech, but the way someone selects exactly the words they mean and no others. Those people still need the skills, whether or not anyone can ever see the record. Tran said nothing. He let the silence be what it was. After a moment she said, Tell your contact that the record doesn't matter to me, the work mattered. That's not the same thing. She adjusted the badge on her lanyard. She looked at him once more, a brief and specific look that was not warm and was not cold, and was simply the look of one person acknowledging another person, at the correct and precise distance the situation called for. Then she said, I have to get back upstairs. She walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. While she waited, she did not look back at him. And he did not say anything further. Because there was nothing further that needed to be said. The doors opened. She stepped in. Tran stood at the window for a while after. He looked at the parking lot. He thought about what she had said. And he thought about the word record. And what it meant to have given things to something that would never be able to give them back to you. And to have made peace with that. Not the performed peace of someone who has accepted it. Because they had no choice, but the structural peace of someone who had understood from the beginning what the agreement was, and had entered it anyway. He thought about Mr. Callahan, who would go back to teaching chemistry in the spring, who would probably never know that the woman who kept him alive had learned to do what she did in places that didn't appear on any map he'd ever been given clearance to read. He thought that this was all right, that some people were built to give things without receiving them back, and that this was not a tragedy exactly, though it required a kind of strength he was not sure he could measure. He put his hands back in his jacket pockets and walked toward the exit. The spring semester started on a Monday. Mr. Callahan, whose first name was Timothy, which almost none of his students ever used, came back to Hargrove with a slight favor in his left shoulder. that would probably not fully resolve, and a perspective shift he had not requested and could not entirely quantify. He was 51 years old. He had taught AP chemistry for 19 years. He had been told in the hospital that he had survived because of an improvised procedure performed by a bystander in the minutes before the ambulance arrived. He had been told the bystander was a nurse. He had asked for her name. He had been told that she had declined to be identified, that she had asked through the paramedic team that no names be included in any media coverage, and that she not be contacted for comment. He had thought about that for several weeks. He did not fully understand it, but he had been in enough classrooms, watching enough young people try to figure out who they were and what they were willing to do, to know that there were different ways to be in the world, that some people needed the record, the acknowledgement in, the visible loop from action to recognition, that this was not weakness, it was one way of being human, and there was another way, quieter, not lesser. He went back to teaching chemistry. He was, his students noted, a little different, harder to rattle, more patient with the slow kids, which the slow kids appreciated without knowing why. He had always been a good teacher. He was something slightly more than that, and he could not have explained it in terms that would satisfy a performance review. But it was real. Somewhere across town in the daylight hours, she did not belong to. Brooke Weller was sleeping. She would be up by 7. She would go for a run. Same route. She always ran 7 years of the same route now, because consistency was not a comfort to her but a discipline. She would come home and make coffee and sit with it for 20 minutes and then get ready for the night shift. She would do this again tomorrow, and the day after that, and the quiet she moved through in the ordinary hours of her ordinary life would carry the weight of everything she had given to something larger than herself. And it would carry it easily without complaint, the way a structure carries weight when it has been built correctly. She did not need the record. She had never needed the record. She had known what she was doing, and she had done it, and it had been enough, and it would always have been enough. And the morning light through her apartment window was just light, nothing more. And she closed her eyes and let it sit on her face for a moment before she went inside. She was just a nurse. She had always been going to be just a nurse. And the man who was alive because of her would never fully know what that meant. And that was exactly the way she had wanted it.